What if a single accident could open your eyes to a love you never saw coming? Sarah had lived in Maple Grove for almost 9 years, long enough to know every fence and every familiar sidewalk. Yet her life still felt as quiet and unnoticed as the trees that lined her street. And on that warm afternoon, she stepped outside only because she heard the rough, buzzing sound of machinery coming from the backyard, the kind of noise that suggested someone fixing something important. And she quickly realized it was Liam, her neighbor's son, who had just returned from college for the summer and was now helping his parents with repairs. She remembered him, but the young man standing there now looked taller and more confident, focused on the old wooden fence that had been leaning for months. And Sarah found herself pausing, curious about how time could change someone so much. Even though she hadn't meant to stare, the sun was bright. The air smelled like fresh-cut wood, and for a strange moment she felt life moving a little faster than usual, almost pushing her forward towards something she didn't understand yet. And maybe that was why she walked closer without thinking, drawn by a mix of politeness and something she couldn't quite name, hoping to say hello and just make small talk the way neighbors do. But as she stepped near the fence, the saw suddenly kicked up, sending a burst of dust that caught the sunlight and spun toward her eyes before she could lift her hand to protect herself. So all she saw was a blur of brown, then white, then nothing but a sharp sting that made her stop in pure surprise, because she never expected something so ordinary to hurt so suddenly. And in that moment, she wasn't thinking about anything except the fact that she couldn't see clearly, her vision fading into a strange fog while Liam dropped the tool and rushed toward her with a panic that sounded almost too heavy for the situation. But his worry felt real and close and comforting in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. And even though she tried to stay calm, fear crept in as her sight became more blurry, making her wonder if this was serious or just temporary. She heard Liam apologizing again and again, his voice uncertain, trying to guide her inside and offering to call someone while she tried to reassure him, even though she didn't know what was happening. And she could feel his hand hovering near her arm, as if he wanted to support her without making her uncomfortable, which struck her as thoughtful and surprisingly gentle for someone so young. The afternoon that had begun so normal suddenly felt like the beginning of something unexpected, as Liam insisted on driving her to the emergency room and Sarah didn't have the strength to argue. Partly because her eyes felt like sand had been poured into them, and partly because she didn't want to be alone with that fear. So she let him help her into his car, listening to the nervous way he breathed while he tried to make conversation to distract her, asking how long she had lived in Maple Grove, and if she liked it here, as if he needed to fill the silence so she wouldn't worry too much. Sarah answered as best she could, trying to joke about the situation, even though she couldn't open her eyes without pain. And she wondered why she cared so much that he seemed upset, which was confusing because she barely knew him anymore. Yet somehow, his concern made her feel strangely important, like someone actually noticed her for the first time in a while. When they reached the hospital, the doctor quickly checked her eyes and explained that it was only irritation from sawdust, nothing permanent. But she would need to rest for a few days and keep her eyes covered to prevent more damage. And even though that news should have made her calm, the idea of temporary blindness made her heart beat faster, because it meant she would have to rely on someone else, something she hadn't done in years since she mostly lived quietly and independently, not expecting help from anyone. But Liam stayed, waiting through every moment, making sure she understood what the doctor said and promising he would check on her later. And when they headed back, he walked her into her own house like a careful guide, reminding her to call him if she needed anything at all. And Sarah felt grateful in a way she couldn't express because she was used to being invisible in her own routine. Yet here was someone paying attention, someone who didn't rush away the moment responsibility ended. She sat carefully on her couch afterward, letting the darkness settle around her, thinking about how fast everything had changed in just a few hours. And even though this situation frightened her, she couldn't deny this strange twist of fate that connected her to someone she hadn't expected. Someone whose simple act of fixing a fence had shifted the quiet rhythm of her life. And as she rested her eyes, she wondered if this accident was just an accident, or the beginning of something more, something she didn't see coming. Not because she was blind at that moment, but because life sometimes hides turning points inside the most ordinary days, waiting for the exact second everything changes without warning. Sarah spent the next days inside her quiet house with her eyes covered, learning how strange it felt to live in darkness, even though she knew it was temporary. And at first, she tried to keep everything normal, moving slowly, memorizing where every object was. But simple things suddenly felt harder, like making coffee or finding her phone. And she realized how much she depended on sight without even thinking about it. The doctor had warned that her eyes needed rest from all light. So she kept the curtains closed and used soft music to fill the silence, which made the hours feel long. But the most unexpected part was how often she heard a knock on her door. And every time it was Liam, sounding both nervous and determined, as if he had made it his responsibility to take care of her while she healed. He came with small things she didn't ask for, like chicken soup. His mother had cooked her audiobooks he found online, or sometimes just a gentle voice saying he was checking in. And Sarah felt both grateful and uncertain because she wasn't used to someone being this attentive. Especially someone younger who should be out enjoying summer instead of visiting a neighbor who couldn't even open her eyes. She tried telling him he didn't need to come every day, but he always answered that he wanted to make sure she was okay. And somehow his tone made her feel like she shouldn't argue. In the darkness, she listened to every sound more closely. The quiet sigh he made when he sat on the chair near her couch, the way he stirred the spoon in the bowl before handing it to her carefully, the soft concern in his voice when he asked how much her eyes still hurt. And sometimes those moments felt strangely intimate, even though nothing inappropriate was happening. It was simply the closeness of being vulnerable while someone else cared. Sarah found herself talking more than she expected, telling him little pieces about her life that she normally kept to herself, like how she moved to Maple Grove for a calmer life after a difficult breakup, or how she always felt like she'd lost a part of herself in that relationship. And she didn't know why she was saying so much, except that Liam listened quietly without judging, which made her words come out easier than she planned. Liam shared pieces of his own life, too, about college feeling overwhelming sometimes, about not knowing what direction he wanted to follow. And Sarah could hear a hint of uncertainty beneath his confident voice, like he was trying to figure out who he was supposed to become. And she found that honest vulnerability more touching than anything she had expected from him. She realized she wasn't just hearing his voice. She was learning who he was without needing to look at his face, which felt strangely meaningful in a way she couldn't explain. There were evenings when the house felt warmer just because he was there, sitting nearby, reading aloud from a book or playing gentle music so she wouldn't feel trapped in silence. And Sarah noticed how time moved faster when he was around, almost making her forget she was injured, and instead making her aware of how long she had gone without real company. She tried not to think too much about what that meant, reminding herself that this was temporary, that once her eyes healed, everything would go back to normal. Yet a small part of her wondered why her heart beat a little faster every time he knocked on the door. And she tried to ignore that feeling because it didn't make sense. One afternoon, while he helped her walk to the kitchen, she felt his hand lightly guide her elbow, such careful gentleness that her breath caught for a moment. Not because she was uncomfortable, but because she wasn't used to anyone being that attentive. And something inside her shifted quietly. Something she tried not to name. She reminded herself he was simply being kind, a responsible young man worried about causing an accident and nothing more. But the truth was, she couldn't deny. He made her feel noticed in a way she hadn't felt for a long time. In the darkness, Sarah found herself thinking more deeply about everything, about her life, her loneliness, and the strange comfort she felt when Liam spoke softly in the room. And she wondered why fate worked like this, bringing someone into her life at such an unexpected moment, almost as if the accident had forced her to pause and feel things she had ignored for years. She told herself these thoughts were only passing feelings brought on by vulnerability. Yet every day his voice became more familiar, more calming, and somehow more important. As the days passed, she began to fear the moment her sight would return, because she wasn't sure which part of this connection would remain when she could finally open her eyes again. The day Sarah finally removed the bandages from her eyes felt both ordinary and extraordinary, as if the world had been waiting quietly for her to notice it again. When she blinked against the sudden light, the first thing she saw was Liam standing nearby, nervous and hesitant. And for a moment, her heart skipped because she realized just how much she had missed seeing him, even though she had known his voice so well. His eyes held a careful hope, the kind that asked a question without words. And when he softly asked, "Can you see me?" she nodded, her lips barely forming the word yes, and everything seemed sharper, brighter and heavier with unspoken feelings she hadn't expected. The sunlight catching the edge of his hair, the way he shifted his weight nervously, the small crease of worry that made him look younger and more tender than she remembered. Over the next few days, life returned to a sense of normality, but nothing felt the same because Sarah now noticed everything about him in a way she never had before. The way his hands moved when he helped carry groceries for his mother, the way he laughed without thinking about who might be watching, and the subtle kindness in the way he greeted neighbors. She realized that these small actions revealed the depth of his character, making it impossible for her to look at him as just the young man she had once known, but rather as someone fully present and alive, someone whose presence stirred something she had long tried to ignore. Sarah found herself drawn to simple moments together, walking through the garden, watching the sunset, sharing coffee on the porch, where she could see the expressions she had only imagined in the days she was blind. And each moment made her feel the tension between familiarity and something dangerously close to attraction. Yet she reminded herself constantly of the differences in their ages, of the life experiences that separated them, as if sheer logic could protect her heart from the quiet pull she felt every time he laughed or looked her way. One evening, as the sky turned soft shades of pink and gold, Liam spoke quietly about college, of fears he didn't usually share, and Sarah felt herself leaning closer, not physically, but in every sense of emotional attention, feeling every word land in her chest like a tiny spark. And she realized that the accident that had blinded her had somehow revealed clarity she hadn't expected, that being unable to see had forced her to hear and feel with a precision that opened doors she thought were long closed. She noticed that she anticipated his visits, replayed conversations in her head, and wondered what he was doing when he wasn't around, a sensation she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. And although part of her wanted to deny it, another part quietly thrilled at the thought that this young man who had grown up before her eyes was now making her world feel alive again. In moments of quiet reflection, she remembered how lonely she had been, how much she had hidden behind routines and polite smiles. And suddenly the idea of connection became almost overwhelming, yet in a comforting way because it reminded her she was still capable of feeling deeply, of caring intensely, even if she didn't understand all the reasons. When Liam's hand brushed hers by accident while handing over a cup of tea, she felt a rush that startled her, making her heart beat faster, and she caught herself imagining the life she had stopped believing in, a life where she could be seen, noticed, and maybe even loved. Not as a passing acquaintance, but as someone who mattered entirely to another person. Every interaction felt heightened now, from the casual way he talked about his day to the gentle concern in his tone whenever she mentioned minor discomforts. And Sarah realized that the world seemed sharper and more vivid when he was near, that small gestures carried enormous weight, and that she had unknowingly waited years for someone to make her feel this alive. She also noticed his moments of hesitation, the pauses before he spoke as if he were choosing his words carefully, and those pauses told her more than any sentence could, revealing honesty and depth in a way that made her chest tighten with anticipation and longing. And although Sarah tried to remind herself that life had boundaries, responsibilities, and differences that should keep her cautious, she found the pull between them impossible to ignore, as if the accident and the days in darkness had shifted her heart toward him in a way nothing else could. And now seeing him clearly, feeling him clearly, she understood that what she felt was no longer just curiosity or gratitude. It was something far more tender and urgent, a quiet revelation that made the world shimmer around them, and set the stage for feelings neither of them had expected, but both could no longer deny. Sarah felt a mixture of fear and excitement as the days passed, the kind of emotion that made her heart pound in ways she hadn't experienced in years. And she knew that the closeness she felt with Liam had grown into something far beyond friendship. Yet she tried to ignore it, reminding herself of their differences, of the age gap, of the parts of life he hadn't lived yet. But her mind betrayed her with every glance, every smile, and every word he spoke that carried gentle concern, patience, and an unspoken understanding of her moods. One evening they stood on her porch together, the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange, and Liam hesitated before finally saying something that made her chest tighten. "Sarah, you changed something in me." And those words, simple but heavy with meaning, broke through the careful walls she had built around herself, walls that had kept her from hope, from excitement, from allowing herself to feel fully in years. And she realized she couldn't hide from the truth any longer, that she had begun to care for him in ways that frightened and thrilled her at the same time. She looked at him, searching for hesitation, wondering if he truly understood what he was saying. And yet there was only honesty in his eyes, a quiet certainty that made it impossible for her to turn away. And in that moment she understood that life had a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways, using moments of vulnerability, accident, and care to create connections that neither time nor circumstance could predict. Sarah felt a rush of emotion, recalling the days she had spent blind, relying on him, hearing his voice and finding herself drawn to it. And now that she could see him fully, every detail only magnified the feelings she had tried to suppress, from the subtle kindness in his gestures to the warmth that radiated from his presence. And she felt as if she were seeing him for the first time in a way that mattered, not just as a neighbor's son she had known years ago, but as someone who could touch her heart in ways she hadn't thought possible. She tried to push him gently away, reminding him that he deserved someone closer to his age, someone whose life experiences aligned more naturally with his. Yet Liam refused, shaking his head with quiet intensity. "I don't care about age. I care about how you make me feel. I care about who you are." And those words sank deep into her chest, stirring something she had kept dormant, a longing for connection, for recognition, for love that transcended convention. And for the first time, she let herself consider that maybe it was okay to feel this way. Maybe it was okay to let someone in who saw her completely, not just the surface she showed the world. That night, Sarah stepped into her backyard, the sky clear and full of stars. And she realized that the darkness she had experienced while her eyes were healing had taught her a strange lesson, that sight is more than physical, that seeing someone truly requires vulnerability, trust, and the willingness to be touched by emotion. And as she looked up at the infinite sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility, wonder, and quiet joy, like discovering a part of life she had long forgotten existed. She understood then that perhaps the accident that blinded her had been a strange kind of blessing, forcing her to slow down, to listen, to feel, and to open her heart in ways she never would have allowed under ordinary circumstances. Sarah realized she had been blind in more ways than one before, blind to her own worth, blind to the fact that love could arrive unexpectedly, blind to the idea that happiness could still be part of her life. And now, standing under the vast star-filled sky with Liam nearby, she finally felt the kind of freedom and clarity she had only read about in stories. A feeling that people called the seventh sky, the place beyond ordinary joy, a moment of rare emotional clarity and deep, unspoken contentment. She didn't need to see the future clearly. She only needed to feel it, to sense that she was no longer alone, that someone had entered her life in the most unlikely way and made her feel alive again, seen again, and capable of opening herself to possibility. And as she felt Liam's presence nearby, steady and patient, she knew that this was the beginning of something profound, a chapter of life she hadn't expected but was ready to embrace fully. Knowing that sometimes love arrives quietly in moments of accident and care, and that it can lift the heart to heights it had almost forgotten existed, leaving her standing beneath the endless sky, no longer blind, finally able to see not just with her eyes but with her heart.